Welcome to the deep dive. Our mission here is pretty simple. You give us the sources, the articles, the research, all the critical analysis, and we just strip away the noise. We deliver the essential insights, the complex context, and those aha moments you need to be truly well informed.
And today, we are taking on a monumental task. We're doing a deep dive into the world building and the uncompromising vision of Toni Morrison. We're not just going to summarize her books. We're really tracing her journey all the way from a working class Ohio childhood to becoming a Nobel laureate, a hugely influential editor, and, one of the most vital and unapologetically Black voices to ever define American letters.
Okay, so let's unpack this. When we talk about Toni Morrison, who was born Chloe Ardelia Wofford in 1931, we're talking about a figure whose influence didn't just, grow. It fundamentally reshaped the entire landscape of American fiction. She wasn't just a novelist. She was an essayist, a professor, and a cultural critic who really forced the mainstream literary world to confront its own blind spots.
Yeah, and her recognition is just staggering. It really speaks to the profound, lasting power of her stories. She got the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1993, the Pulitzer Prize for Beloved in '88, and was honored with the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 2012.
And that's not even all of it.
Not even close. You can add the National Humanities Medal, her induction into the National Women's Hall of Fame. Her achievements aren't just a list of awards. They really represent this seismic shift in whose stories are seen as worthy of a highest literary attention.
Absolutely. And when you look at that whole body of work, you see this one unrelenting focus running through it all. It's about addressing the harsh, often psychological consequences of racism in the United States. And crucially, it's about centering the Black American experience as an entire self-contained universe, not just, a reaction to whiteness.
And that's our mission today, to trace that path. We're going to explore how her deeply rooted upbringing in Lorain, Ohio, really informed her earliest themes. Then how she became this pivotal figure in publishing before her literary breakthrough, and what that enduring philosophy was that, allowed her to create such transcendent art.
And we have some really fascinating nuggets from the source material to share. We're going to look at the deeply personal foundation of her defiance. How a traumatic childhood experience, a lynching that her father witnessed, shaped her whole approach to race. And we'll definitely dedicate some time to unpacking the story behind her famous critique of a U.S. president, a comment that became legendary but is so often stripped of its real political context. To really understand the literature, I think we have to start where the language began for her. Lorain, Ohio. She was born Chloe Ardelia Wofford, the second of 4 kids, into a working-class Black family. And these foundations, they weren't just biographical details, were they? They were the essential fuel for her storytelling.
Oh, precisely. Her parents, Rama and George Wofford, were profoundly influential. They made sure the children were just immersed in this rich cultural inheritance. This wasn't just about getting by. It was about pride and preservation. They passed down African-American folktales, ghost stories, songs. These stories instilled a sense of heritage and language. The rhythm, the vernacular, the capacity for the supernatural, that became the bedrock of her fiction.
What's so interesting, though, is the contrast. So while she was absorbing that essential cultural stream, her home was also intensely intellectual. We know her favorite childhood authors included people like Jane Austen and Leo Tolstoy. How do you square that formal European literary structure with the deeply vernacular oral tradition of African-American culture?
Well, that tension, that blending, is precisely where her genius lies. She mastered the high literary tradition, the rigorous narrative structures of Austen and the epic sweep of Tolstoy. But she chose to fill that structure with the vernacular, with the community's voice, the folk tales, and the history that was passed down orally. It's what allowed her to achieve both incredible psychological depth and real formal complexity.
And speaking of those formative influences, the sources really emphasized this key defining trauma related to her father, George Wofford, who moved north from Georgia. This event seems to have shaped the family's entire perspective on the white world.
The trauma was immense. George Wofford witnessed the lynching of 2 African-American businessmen who lived on his street when he was about 15 years old. This was an experience of raw, existential racial violence, and he carried that wound with him. As Morrison later said, this was so profound that it manifested as this intense, protective hatred of white people. He just wouldn't allow them in the family home.
That protective separation is so telling. It's such an active act of defiance, not just resignation. How do you think that specific environment, being raised by a father who fundamentally saw the white world as a source of, existential danger, how did that later influence her philosophy of writing without the white days?
I think it gave her the psychological freedom she needed to later reject it entirely. If the source of danger is externalized and, walled off, then your internal world, the Black community, is forced to become the center, the absolute reference point. For Morrison, the Black experience was never secondary or reactive. It was the primary human experience. Her father's stance, which was born of so much pain, really laid the groundwork for her literary philosophy.
The family also showed this incredible resilience. I'm thinking of that almost unbelievable story from when she was only 2 years old.
Yes, the story she described as a lesson in keeping your integrity against bizarre forms of evil. When her parents couldn't pay the rent, the landlord, in this just monumental act of crudeness, set fire to their house while they were still inside.
Unbelievable.
And their response as a family was to laugh at him. That laughter wasn't mockery. It was an act of refusal to be diminished by his cruelty. It was a declaration that their spirit was more powerful than his destructive act. It's a key insight into the resilience that you see in all their fiction.
And we should probably note the origin of her name. She was born Chloe Ardelia Wofford, but at age 12, she became Catholic. She took the baptismal name Anthony, which then got shortened to her public nickname, Toni.
Right, and after that foundational home life, she pursued a really Syrian academic path. In 1949, she enrolled at Howard University. This was a very deliberate choice to seek out a community of fellow Black intellectuals. But ironically, it was at Howard that she first encountered the blatant, systematic segregation of the Deep South, racially segregated restaurants and buses, which was a huge difference from her more integrated upbringing in Ohio.
She studied drama at Howard, and as part of the Howard Players, she traveled through the Deep South. That must have been a really eye-opening experience.
A crucial exposure to the racial codes that define so much of America. And then she continued her graduate work at Cornell, getting her M.A. in 1955. And her thesis is so revealing: Virginia Woolf's and William Faulkner's treatment of the alienated. This shows her early engagement with the modern literary masters and this profound theme of alienation, a feeling she would later locate specifically within race and American history.
So after teaching for a while, her personal life shifted pretty dramatically. She married Harold Morrison, a Jamaican architect, had 2 sons, but they divorced in 1964. She was actually pregnant with her second son at the time. And this period, divorce and single motherhood, it prompted this pivotal turn in her professional life, not into writing, but into editing.
And this is such a crucial and often overlooked stage of her career. After a job in Syracuse, she transferred to the main Random House office in New York City, and this is where she became a real power broker. In the late 1960s, Toni Morrison became Random House's first Black woman senior editor in the fiction department.
What's so fascinating here is that she had gained this institutional authority inside the mainstream publishing world before she got famous as a writer. And she used that power to actively build the modern Black literary canon, validating and promoting voices that had been historically marginalized.
Exactly. She understood that power wasn't just about writing. It was about gatekeeping. It was about access. She championed an entire generation of Black writers, including Cade Bambara, the activist Angela Davis, Huey Newton, Gail Jones. She didn't shy away from controversial or politically charged voices. She saw them as essential. She even worked on Muhammad Ali's 1975 autobiography, The Greatest.
She was basically a cultural curator, bringing essential and neglected history to light. And this is perfectly shown by her major publishing achievement from that time, The Black Book.
The Black Book was this widely praised anthology compiled by Morrison that documented Black life in the U.S. from slavery through the 1920s. It used photographs, essays, documents. Random House had been, a bit uncertain about it at first.
I can imagine.
But its reception was ecstatic. It's a remarkable piece of preservation. And it was during the compilation of this very book that she stumbled upon the real-life story of Margaret Garner, the enslaved woman who...
Like killed her child.
Yes. So her work as an editor, as a curator, it directly fed the inspiration for her most celebrated novel years later. The institutional role prepared her for the artistic one.
It's hard to overstate how influential she was as an editor before she ever became a famous author. She was already shaping the literary world, and her own transition to novelist came after she started writing in an informal writers group while she was teaching at Howard.
That small group was the safe space where her first novel, The Bluest Eye, was born in 1970. It started as a short story about a Black girl, Pecola Breedlove, who internalized racism so deeply that she just longed for blue eyes. The novel is a searing look at how racial aesthetic standards can destroy self-worth from within the community.
And the context of its creation is legendary. It shows her sheer discipline. She famously got up every morning at 4 a.m. to write while raising 2 young children by herself. Is that commitment reflected anywhere in the themes of the novel itself?
Oh, absolutely. That early morning discipline reflects the novel's thematic core. The difficulty of carving out a space for self-creation and dignity in a world that is constantly trying to diminish you. The very act of writing The Bluest Eye was an act of repossession, mirroring the theme of the Black community struggling to claim its own internal beauty.
And it was published when she was 39. The critical praise was immediate, but the commercial success was a little slower at first.
Correct. The New York Times praised her precise prose, but initial sales were pretty modest. The big shift came when colleges and universities started adopting the Bluest Eye for their new Black Studies departments. So this institutional adoption, driven by the very cultural movement she was championing as an editor, cemented the book's importance. Her next book, Sula, which focused on the complex friendship between two Black women, was quickly nominated for the National Book Award.
But the novel that truly launched her into the national consciousness, the one that really established her, was Song of Solomon in 1977.
Song of Solomon is just massive, both in its scope and its influence. It follows the main character, Macon Milkman Dead III, as he undertakes this journey to discover his heritage. It weaves together realism, myth, folk tradition. The style incorporates what we now call magical realism, like the myth of the Flying Africans, to explore themes of identity and escape.
And its historical significance is just impossible to overlook.
It was the first novel by a Black writer to be chosen as a main selection of the Book of the Month Club since Richard Wright's Native Son.
Which was way back in 1940.
In 1940. That 37-year gap just underscores how monumental this achievement was. Native Son was groundbreaking, but Song of Solomon defined a new path, a literary style that embraced cultural myth and lyrical prose. It won the National Book Critics Circle Award, and that made her a literary star.
And then came 1987, and the publication of Beloved, which for so many people is the crowning achievement of her whole career. And we mentioned the inspiration for this came directly from her editorial work on the Black Book.
Yes, from the true story of Margaret Garner, an enslaved woman who, after escaping, killed her 2-year-old daughter to prevent the child's return to slavery. Morrison took this horrific historical act and transformed it into this complex, psychological, supernatural story. The plot imagines the dead baby returning as a ghost, named Beloved, to haunt the mother, Seethe, and her family.
The narrative structure of Beloved is, well, it's famously fragmented. It refuses a simple linear telling of the story. How did that deliberate fragmentation serve the themes of trauma and memory?
Well, trauma doesn't operate in a straight line, does it? It exists in constant flashes and repetitions. By fragmenting the timeline, Morrison forces the reader to experience the persistence of the past. The ghost, Beloved, isn't just a horror trope. She's the physical embodiment of unacknowledged, unmourned history. The novel's central question is, how do you deal with a past so horrific it's unspeakable? And the answer, structurally, is by forcing the community, and you, the reader, to piece the story together, piece by painful piece.
The critical reception was immediate and overwhelmingly positive. It was a bestseller for 25 weeks. And yet, despite all this, the novel initially failed to win the major awards,
Right.
which led to a very public and highly charged literary controversy.
It did. Beloved was shockingly overlooked by both the National Book Award and the National Book Critics Circle Award that year. And this omission sparked this profound outrage among her peers, who felt that the establishment was still unwilling to recognize the full scope of genius when it came from a Black woman writing about the central trauma of American history.
And this is where the power of collective cultural advocacy came into play. 48 prominent Black critics and writers, including Maya Angelou, published a public protest statement in the New York Times. What was the underlying message of that protest?
It was an assertion of cultural authority. It wasn't just about winning an award, it was about defining value. The statement essentially told the overwhelmingly white literary establishment, you are missing the most important voice of our time. Your system of validation is flawed.
Wow.
And it worked. The sources show that Beloved won the Pulitzer Prize for fiction 2 months later, cementing its place in the canon.
It's also really important to see Beloved not just as a standalone masterpiece, but as the beginning of a larger literary project. It was the first in a trilogy.
This trilogy concept is a key insight into her whole method. She said they were linked by the search for the beloved, the part of the self that is you and loves you and is always there for you. Jazz, the second book, tries to recover that identity through the rhythm of improvisation, set in the Harlem Renaissance. And Paradise, the final book, moves to a communal scale, focusing on an all-Black town in Oklahoma and exploring the failures of utopianism.
And during this same incredibly productive period, she also released a piece of nonfiction that has been just profoundly influential on how literature is taught in universities.
That would be Playing in the Dark. Whiteness and the Literary Imagination from 1992. It's a collection of essays examining the Africanist presence in classic American literature by white authors like Poe, Hawthorne, Melville. It's one of her most frequently assigned texts on college campuses, a true watershed moment.
So how did she define that Africanist presence, and why was it so revolutionary to point it out?
She argued that this presence, the Black or African figure, was consistently used as a structural necessity, this silent, dark shadow that allowed white authors to define their own concepts of freedom and innocence.
So like Jim in Huckleberry Finn.
Exactly. His status as a non-person is what allows Huck to have his moral journey. Morrison argued that criticism had been too polite or too fearful to notice this disrupting darkness that fundamentally underpinned the white American story. She forced critics to confront the fact that American identity was constructed in opposition to the Black figure.
It just fundamentally shifted the gaze. And then in 1993 came the ultimate validation of her life's work, the Nobel Prize in Literature.
She was the first Black woman of any nationality to win. The Nobel Committee praised her novels for being characterized by visionary force and poetic import, giving life to an essential aspect of American reality. It was global recognition that her work wasn't on the periphery. It was central to understanding the modern condition.
And in her acceptance speech, she left us with that incredibly memorable line, "We die, that may be the meaning of life, but we do language. That may be the measure of our lives."
It just encapsulates her belief in the enduring, regenerative power of narrative. Language is the tool for building and preserving culture. Her Nobel lecture itself is a beautiful metaphor, a story about an old, blind Black woman approached by young people who demand literature for their lives. And her command to them was not to read the past, but to create the future, make up a story.
In the later stages of her career, Morrison really solidified her role as a public intellectual. She was wielding influence through, both the rigorous world of academia and the broad reach of mass media.
Her academic career was just exceptional. She held the prestigious Robert F. Goheen Chair in the Humanities at Princeton from 1989 until she retired in 2006. And this gave her an institutional platform to influence the next generation of thinkers and artists.
It's during her Princeton years that she made that very clear statement on the artist's responsibility, famously telling her creative writing students, "I don't want to hear about your little life, okay?"
And that quote is so often misunderstood as just a dismissal of memoir, but it's much deeper. It's a philosophical statement about the responsibility of art. She was demanding that her students go beyond mere personal anecdote and tap into something universal, something invented. Her own refusal to ever write an autobiography confirms this.
She also had a huge impact on Princeton's creative structure, developing the Princeton Atelier.
The Atelier was a crucial cross-disciplinary program she conceived. The whole goal was to bring students together with professional artists to produce public, collaborative works. It emphasized process and creation. Her impact was later honored when Morrison Hall at Princeton was dedicated to her in 2017.
Okay, now let's talk about her foray into mass media, specifically the film adaptation of Beloved in 1998, which was co-produced by and starred Oprah Winfrey. Oprah spent 10 years bringing that book to the screen, which just shows her deep commitment to Morrison's work.
The film's reception was, well, it was complicated. It was a commercial flop at the box office. A lot of publications chalked it up to audiences just being unwilling to endure nearly 3 hours of a cerebral film, dealing with murder, rape, slavery, and supernatural themes. It was difficult material.
But critics who understood her work defended the structure. I know Roger Ebert, for example, noted that the film's nonlinear structure was an intentional echo of the novel.
Yes, it was used to explore the deeper issues of generational trauma, not just to provide a simple story. But regardless of the film's box office, Oprah Winfrey proved to be the single most potent commercial engine for Morrison's work through the power of her book club. This became known as the Oprah Effect.
This is a truly remarkable case study in how mass media can elevate serious literature. Starting with Song of Solomon in 1996, Oprah selected 4 of Morrison's novels. It exposed her work to a massive audience that went way beyond academic and traditional literary circles.
And the statistics are just stunning. The sales boost Morrison got from the Oprah selections surpassed the sales lift her work received from winning the Nobel Prize.
Really? That's incredible.
Yeah. To give you a concrete example, when Winfrey selected The Bluest Eye in 2000, it sold an additional 800,000 paperback copies. It just confirms her unique ability to speak across cultural divides to the intellectual elite and the mass reading public at the same time.
Morrison herself called the book club a reading revolution. It affirmed her belief that serious, difficult literature could resonate deeply with the popular audience if it was just given a platform.
In her later years, she also explored a lot of creative collaborations.
Mhm.
She provided text for classical music scores. She collaborated on the song cycle, Honey and Rue and Woman.Life.Song.
And she went right back to the historical roots of Beloved when she wrote the libretto for the opera Margaret Garner in 2005.
It just shows her deep, lasting commitment to that story. She transformed it across mediums, from historical document to novel to theatrical performance. In 2011, she also collaborated with director Peter Sellers on Desdemona, which was a powerful re-examination of Shakespeare's Othello, focusing on the relationship between Desdemona and her African nursemaid.
Personally, though, this later period was marked by profound tragedy. Her younger son, Slade Kevin Morrison, with whom she had collaborated on several children's books, died of pancreatic cancer in 2010.
It was an immense loss, one that briefly caused her to stop writing altogether. She later spoke very movingly about the difficulty of continuing, but she realized that Slade would have been profoundly disappointed if his death had caused her to abandon her art. She concluded he would want her to continue, so she finished Home in 2012, a story of a Korean War veteran grappling with trauma, and she dedicated it to Slade.
And her 11th and final novel, God Help the Child, published in 2015, confirmed that her vision was still sharp and focused right until the end.
Yes, it focuses on Bride, an executive who is traumatized by her mother for being dark-skinned, a theme that brings her career full circle, right back to the internalized racism she explored in The Bluest Eye.
So moving beyond her narrative achievements and cultural influence, we need to really focus on the philosophical core of Toni Morrison's work, because it's built on this radical sense of self-possession and literary defiance. This is where the deep dive analysis truly begins.
And the centerpiece of this philosophy is her absolute, unyielding commitment to writing without the white gaze. She made it her mission to ensure that the white gaze was not the dominant one in her books, meaning the narrative was never structured to explain Black life to a white readership.
So how did that practice actually impact the structure and the language of her novels? If she was purposefully excluding the dominant cultural reference point, how did she stay so accessible and critically rigorous?
Well, she maintained rigor by focusing purely on the internal dynamics. When you remove the white gaze, you remove the need for exposition, for justification, for translation. She didn't footnote vernacular, she didn't explain cultural practices. She simply presented the African-American experience as the entire necessary universe. And this forces the reader, no matter their background, to enter her world on her terms. She once said about navigating the white male world, "It wasn't even interesting. I was more interesting than they were. I knew more than they did."
That's quite a statement.
It is, and that internal confidence allowed her to write fiction that just required no external validation.
She was also very explicit that she was writing to and for a specific primary audience, primarily Black women. She said in a 1986 interview, "We are writing to repossess, rename, re-own."
And that is a declaration of artistic sovereignty. Repossess the history stolen by slavery, rename the self and the community, and re-own the narrative perspective. She accepted the labels Black and female, arguing that they weren't restrictive but expansive, that they gave her a rich place to write from.
Her views on feminism, however, were often more nuanced, which can sometimes be confusing for readers who are expecting a simple ideological alignment.
She avoided identifying her work as purely feminist because she wanted to maintain open doors and avoid being boxed into closed positions or restrictive ideologies. While she strongly advocated for equitable access for women, she rejected limiting structures, criticizing both patriarchy and matriarchy as limiting forms of power.
And this ties into the Black feminist movement of the 1970s, which often adopted the term womanist.
It does. She noted that Black feminists often called themselves womanists, a term coined by Alice Walker. This reflected a historically different relationship with Black men, where Black women often felt compelled to shelter and protect them, knowing they were the ones most likely to be killed by systemic violence. Their struggle was linked to the survival of the entire community.
Okay, let's tackle something that gets brought up all the time, but I think it's almost always misunderstood. Her phrase calling Bill Clinton our first Black president, this demands some serious unpacking.
Oh, this is vital context. The phrase appeared in a 1998 New Yorker article during the height of the Whitewater investigation and the impeachment proceedings. She did not mean he was literally black. She meant he was being treated by the political system and the media like a black man.
So the analogy was rooted in her deep critique of systemic criminalization.
Exactly. She argued he was being treated like a black on the street, already guilty, already a perp, subjected to a level of scrutiny, and assumed guilt that is structurally reserved for black men. She later clarified it was a critique of the system's overzealous, racially charged behavior toward him. It was a statement about structural racism, not racial identity.
And she maintained that sharp political focus in the post-Obama era. After endorsing Barack Obama in 2008, she later focused heavily on the continued lack of racial accountability in America.
Her 2015 commentary on police violence set this extraordinarily high bar for judging when racial conflict would be over. She stated, "I want to see a cop shoot a white, unarmed teenager in the back, and I want to see a white man convicted for raping a black woman. Then when you ask me, is it over? I will say yes."
That quote is just a powerful, almost desperate call for true systemic inversion, a belief that equality will only be achieved when white individuals face the same presumption of guilt.
And after the 2016 election, she wrote the piercing essay, Mourning for Whiteness. Her analysis was that white Americans had elected Donald Trump, whom she noted was endorsed by the Ku Klux Klan, not necessarily because they believed in his policies, but because they fundamentally feared losing their racial privileges.
So in her view, the vote was an act of preserving white supremacy.
Right. But her influence, it transcends political commentary, and it's rooted in tangible memorialization and literary activism. Her birthday is Toni Morrison Day in Ohio. Her papers are at Princeton.
But the most powerful piece of her enduring legacy might be the Bench by the Road project. This concept comes directly from a 1988 speech.
Yes, she was lamenting the national refusal to memorialize the victims of slavery. She noted that while there are monuments to wars and generals, there's no small bench by the road. This phrase inspired the Toni Morrison Society to start installing physical memorial benches by the road at historically significant sites, like Sullivan's Island, South Carolina, a major entry point for enslaved Africans.
This project is the ultimate physical embodiment of her literary philosophy, an active, ongoing process of recognizing and re-owning the world. A quote from her is also inscribed at the National Memorial for Peace and Justice in Montgomery.
Zadie Smith, a writer who is heavily influenced by Morrison, captured the vast scope of her influence perfectly. She noted that Morrison, quote, rejected the very concept of the narrow door and claimed for herself the wide world. She didn't wait for permission. She just redefined the boundaries of what was possible.
What an immense, world-altering life we've just traced. We've seen her arc from Chloe Wofford, the child of working-class Ohio grounded in resilience and folktales, to the crucial editor who used institutional authority to champion an entire generation of Black literary voices.
And from there, she ascended to become an author who won the highest literary honor, the Nobel Prize, by writing what the New York Times Book Review rightly called the best work of American fiction published in the previous 25 years. Beloved.
Her core strength, and the reason her legacy is so vital, was her absolute, uncompromising decision to center the Black experience as the complete, entire universe of her fiction. By rejecting the need to address the white gaze, she expanded the literary world for everyone, showing that true universality is found in profound specificity.
So what does this all mean? If we connect this to the bigger picture, Morrison's Nobel quote, "We do language, that may be the measure of our lives." It encapsulates her life's work as a continuous act of creation and preservation. She used language to measure and define history, repossessing, renaming, and re-owning the past through story.
And that commitment to language was also a caution. In her 1996 Jefferson lecture, she argued that time, it seems, has no future. She was cautioning against the misuse of history, how it can diminish future expectations by locking us into these past narratives of failure or limitation.
We are deeply indebted to Toni Morrison for the immense, expansive space she created in literature. But the work of using language to measure life continues. And based on her warnings, we leave you with this final provocative thought. What story are you telling yourself about the past, your history, your family, your community, that might be unintentionally limiting your expectations for the future? Go explore her work, find your own bench by the road, and think about the radical potential of the language you do.
Thank you for joining us for the deep dive. We'll see you next time.